There's something haunting about a Scorpio's absence, not loud, not dramatic, but silent, like the calm after a storm you never saw coming. And if you've ever walked away from a Scorpio, or worse, pushed them away, you probably already know you don't feel their loss immediately. You feel it later, when your soul is quiet, when the noise fades and you realize something is missing. But it wasn't just a person you lost, it was a portal to intensity, to depth, to a love that terrified you because it was too honest, too consuming, too real. You see, Scorpio doesn't just love you, they mirror your darkness. They sit with your secrets. They love the version of you that even you were afraid to show. And when you lose that, the regret isn't loud, it's subtle, but it spreads like ink in water into your mornings, your memories, your relationships, your silence. Because here's the thing no one dares to admit. When you lose a Scorpio, you don't move on, you move around them. Like a scar, like a ghost, like a chapter you keep rereading, but can never rewrite. In today's video, we're going deep into the 12 undeniable reasons why people who leave a Scorpio always sooner or later regret it. And if you're watching this thinking about that one Scorpio in your past, maybe this isn't just a video, maybe it's your soul's way of finally facing the truth. So breathe deep and let's begin. Reason 1, a Scorpio isn't just a lover. They're a catalyst for transformation. Most people come into your life like chapters, but a Scorpio, they arrive like a plot twist, not just to add to your story, but to rewrite the foundation of who you are. You think it's a relationship, but what you're really stepping into is an initiation into truth, into depth, into a version of yourself you didn't know existed, or maybe were too afraid to meet. Scorpios don't skim the surface. They dive into the shadows you've buried. They pull up the roots of your pain, not to hurt you, but to set you free. Here's the truth. Most people can't handle that. They mistake the intensity for danger. They confuse truth for control. And so they leave, not because they didn't feel love, but because they weren't ready to become who they were meant to be. But the irony, the moment they leave, the transformation continues. Silently, relentlessly. Without the Scorpio present, their influence remains. Because Scorpios don't just touch your life, they brand it with depth, with honesty, with a demand for authenticity you can never unsee. People regret leaving Scorpios not because they lost affection, but because they lost the one person who saw them before they knew how to see themselves. Real-life example. Jamie, a 29-year-old entrepreneur from Chicago, once dated a Scorpio woman in his early career. At the time, she pushed him to confront his guilt about past failures, his fear of vulnerability, and the truth behind his constant overworking. He felt exposed. He said it felt like she saw the version of me that I tried to hide from the world. And she loved him anyway. But it was too much. He left. 2 years later, while in therapy and going through a spiritual awakening, he realized everything she once challenged in him was exactly what he needed to evolve. She was the earthquake that broke me, he said, but also the beginning of who I became. Life lesson from reason 1, sometimes the people who make you the most uncomfortable are not here to harm you, they're here to awaken you. And Scorpios, they don't show up in your life to complete your story. They show up to break it open so the real you can finally emerge. Reason 2, Scorpios love you deeper than you realize, even in silence. When a Scorpio loves you, it's never casual. Even if they barely say it, even if they act like they're in control, even if they pretend they've moved on, they don't love like the rest of the world. They love like a vow, like a sacred contract written in the invisible ink of shared souls. You may not see it in words, but you'll feel it in their stillness, in their loyalty, in their protection. The heartbreak comes when you realize far too late that the Scorpio you left, the one you thought didn't care enough to fight for you, was loving you in the most powerful way a human soul can love quietly. Scorpios don't chase, not because they don't care, but because their love has dignity, and if they sense you pulling away, they won't beg. They'll bleed in silence. They'll grieve behind locked emotional doors, but they'll never hand you their power, even if you already hold their heart. So when you walk away, you think they didn't care. You think they didn't try. But here's the cosmic truth. Scorpios mourn in private, the loudest heartbreaks you'll never hear. Real life example. Let's talk about Alana, a Scorpio woman from Oregon. She fell for someone who constantly accused her of being cold and distant. He said, "You never say how you feel," but what he didn't see was everything she did. The late night check-ins, the quiet sacrifices, the way she defended him behind closed doors even when he didn't deserve it. Eventually, he left claiming she wasn't expressive enough. Years later, he sent her a message, "I didn't understand your kind of love, until I realized I've never felt that safe since." That's the Scorpio paradox. They'll let you walk, but they'll leave a kind of love so deep, so sacred, that nothing ever quite compares again. Life lesson from reason 2. Sometimes we mistake loud for love, but real love, the kind that stays when you're ugly, the kind that protects when no one is watching, it's usually quiet. Don't walk away from someone just because their love isn't loud, because silence, especially from a Scorpio, is often the language of loyalty. Reason 3, no one endures your darkness like a Scorpio until they can't anymore. Everyone loves the light parts of you, the success, the charm, the smile you wear in public. But a Scorpio, they sit with your shadows. They see the parts of you that even you avoid, and they don't flinch. They stay when the mask falls, when the walls come down, when the wounds bleed, not because it's easy, but because their soul understands pain and refuses to abandon those in it. Scorpios are warriors of emotional intensity. They don't turn away from brokenness, they move toward it. They hold space for your healing even when you resist it. But here's what most people get wrong. They think that just because a Scorpio endures, they'll never walk away. Wrong. They will endure pain until the moment they realize you don't want to heal, that you're not meeting them halfway, that you're mistaking their loyalty for weakness. And when that moment comes, they vanish. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with finality. And that's when the regret sets in hard. Because you realize you lost the one person who saw your mess and didn't run. Real life example. Mark, a musician from Brooklyn, struggled for years with depression and addiction. He met a Scorpio woman named Elise who stayed with him through relapse after relapse. She never shamed him. She never tried to fix him. She just stayed holding him accountable, loving him anyway. But after 3 years of promises with no change, Elise walked. Not dramatically, not with blame, just quietly and permanently. Mark once said in an interview, "She loved me when I was at my worst. And when she left, I realized I had mistaken her grace for a guarantee." Life lesson from reason 3. Don't test the patience of someone who's already forgiven more than you know. Just because they're still standing doesn't mean they're not breaking inside. And if you ever had a Scorpio hold space for your pain, cherish that. Because once they stop, it's over. Not just the relationship, but the rare sacred sanctuary you'll likely never find again. Reason 4. A Scorpio doesn't just leave, they haunt your soul. Some people exit your life and fade like smoke. A memory, a whisper, a name you forget to mention. But a Scorpio, they don't just leave, they embed. In the silence between your thoughts, in the lyrics of songs you didn't even know reminded you of them, in the way someone else touches you, and it just doesn't feel the same. You see, Scorpios aren't memories, they're imprints. Because when they love, they go deep. So deep that they anchor themselves to the part of you most people never reach, your emotional marrow. And when that kind of love disappears, it doesn't leave a void, it leaves a presence that lingers, not as pain, but as something missing. Real-life reflection. Claire, a Scorpio man's ex-girlfriend, shared a story during a podcast interview. She said, "I thought I was over him. I really did. New relationship, new life, new career. But one night I was driving home and a storm rolled in, the same way it did the first night he told me he loved me. I had to pull over. I cried like it was yesterday." That's the power of Scorpio energy. It doesn't beg you to remember. It lives inside you so deeply that you can't forget. Why the regret happens. People don't realize they're haunted by a Scorpio until they try to love someone else the same way and find out they can't. Not because the new person isn't good, but because the depth isn't there, the soul connection isn't there, the echo isn't there. Life lesson from reason 4, there are connections that entertain you, and there are connections that transform you. Scorpio falls into the second category, so if you're lucky enough to be loved by one, don't assume you can just move on. Because leaving a Scorpio isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of the haunting. Reason 5. Scorpios protect you in ways you never even see until they're gone. Not all love is loud, and not all protection comes with a warning. Sometimes the person who saves you never tells you they did. That's how Scorpios love, not with flashy declarations or constant validation, but with invisible shields, silent sacrifices, and watchful eyes that never stop scanning for what might hurt you. They sense energy shifts before you do. They notice who's being fake. They detect subtle betrayals, hidden motives, the undercurrent of danger beneath someone's smile, and they act. Not by confronting, but by shielding. You think they're being controlling, distant, too cautious, but later you realize what they were trying to protect you from. And they never asked for credit, because to a Scorpio, protection is sacred, and if they love you, they'll fight for your peace even if you never know the battle happened. Real life story. David, a Scorpio man from Arizona, once ended his partner's longtime friendship with a person she thought was harmless. She called him overprotective, controlling, even jealous. But after their breakup, she found out that same friend had been sabotaging her career behind the scenes for years, and David had known. He just didn't want to ruin her trust. So he distanced that person quietly to protect her. Years later, she said, "I didn't realize he was my shield until he was gone, and by then, the damage he once protected me from finally found me." The regret, this is why people regret leaving Scorpios, not because they miss the attention, but because they realize that the protection they once resented was actually divine intervention. You don't just lose a partner when you lose a Scorpio, you lose a guardian. Life lesson from reason 5. Be careful not to confuse control with care. Some people manipulate to feel powerful, but Scorpios, they protect to keep you whole. Don't wait until the storm hits to realize who was quietly holding the umbrella all along. Reason 6. Scorpios turn their pain into power, and watching them rise without you hurts. When most people are broken, they fall apart. But a Scorpio, they burn, and from that fire, they rebuild. Not as who they were, but as someone more powerful, more focused, more untouchable. Scorpios don't stay down. They disappear into silence, yes, but only because they're cocooning, healing, shedding, sharpening. And when they return, they don't come back needing closure. They come back glowing. That's the part that haunts the ones who left. They thought the Scorpio would crumble. Instead, they transformed. It's hard to watch someone you hurt become everything you once prayed for without you. Real life story. Tasha, a Scorpio woman from New Jersey, was left by her fiancé after 5 years. He said she was too intense and he needed freedom. She went quiet, deleted all her accounts, moved cities, started therapy, and rebuilt. 3 years later, she launched her own wellness brand, gave a TED Talk, and appeared in Forbes. Meanwhile, he was still chasing women who only saw the surface, while the one who had once loved him with her soul was now unreachable. He sent her a message, "I didn't know you were the fire that would teach me how to grow until I saw you become it." She never replied. The regret. People regret leaving Scorpios because they expect them to break. But instead they watch them bloom without explanation, without permission, without revenge. And it's not the glow-up that hurts, it's the realization you're no longer part of their story. Life lesson from reason 6. Don't mistake a Scorpio's silence for surrender. They don't chase you because they're too busy chasing their evolution. If you walk away from someone who carries the energy of rebirth, don't be surprised when they return as someone you can no longer touch. Reason 7. A Scorpio teaches you how to love without saying a word. There are people who tell you how to love, and then there are people who show you by the way they exist. Scorpios do not hand you a manual. They don't give you rules or expectations. They just love you in a way that forces you to see what real intimacy feels like. It's not always pretty. It's not always easy. But it's real. And once you've experienced it, nothing less ever satisfies you again. Scorpio love is fierce. It's protective. It's wildly present, even when they're not physically there. They remember the things you forgot you said. They notice your habits, your tells, your emotional temperature. They speak to your wounds instead of your mask. And the whole time you don't realize they're teaching you something. Until they're gone, that's when it hits. You step into a new relationship and suddenly everything feels empty, superficial, safe, but hollow. And you start to understand it wasn't just love, it was a lesson. A sacred curriculum on emotional depth, loyalty, and soul fusion. Real life story. Elliot, a writer from San Diego, dated a Scorpio man for 18 months. He said the relationship felt like being cracked open and finally breathing for the first time, but he wasn't ready for the intensity. He pulled away. Said he needed more space, more simplicity. The Scorpio didn't argue, didn't beg. He simply said, "I understand," and walked away. Elliot dated 5 people after that, but he says, "No one has ever looked at me like that man did, like he could see the parts of me I was still hiding from myself." The regret, you don't just miss a Scorpio's love, you miss the version of yourself that you became around them. Braver, more honest, more alive. And that's a hard thing to forget. Life lesson from reason 7. The deepest relationships don't always come with comfort, they come with clarity. If someone loves you in a way that terrifies your ego but awakens your soul, don't run. Because a Scorpio won't ask you to change. They'll just become the mirror that shows you how. Reason 8. A Scorpio remembers what everyone else forgets, including you. Most people forget the little things. They forget your favorite coffee order, the song that made you cry at 17, or the look in your eyes the day you stopped believing in yourself. But a Scorpio, they don't just remember, they archive you emotionally, energetically, intimately. They study you like sacred scripture. Not because they're obsessive, but because they care deeply in a world where most only pretend to. They remember how you spoke when you were afraid. They remember the words you didn't say and the truth that sat beneath your silence. And when you leave, you suddenly realize how rare that is, how precious it is to be fully seen, not just admired, not just tolerated, but seen, known, remembered. It's only after you've left a Scorpio that you discover everyone else is listening to reply. But the Scorpio they were listening to understand. Real life story. Maya, a Scorpio woman from Boston, had a partner who was emotionally closed off. He never talked about his childhood. He brushed off compliments. He avoided vulnerability. But she saw him. She saw the way he clenched his fists when his father called. She saw the flicker of fear behind his sarcasm. And she held space quietly, consistently. When he left her, he claimed she was too intense, that he needed someone lighter. But 2 years later, he reached out, not to ask for her back, but to say, "No one's ever paid that much attention to who I am beneath the surface. You were the first person who didn't try to fix me, just noticed me." The regret. People leave Scorpios because the connection feels too overwhelming, too vulnerable, too real. And then they realize what they called intensity was actually being remembered in a world built on forgetting. Life lesson from reason 8, it's easy to crave attention, but what your soul is really starving for is recognition. Don't walk away from the people who remember your spirit, because those are the ones who will still carry your name in silence long after the world has moved on. Reason 9, a Scorpio knows the truth even when you never say it. You may think you're hiding, that your secrets are safe, that your half-truths and carefully edited words are enough to protect your image. But not with a Scorpio. They read energy, not just language. They feel the shifts before you speak. They hear the truth in what you're not saying. Scorpios have an almost psychic intuition. They can tell when you're hurting, even when you smile. They can feel when you're pulling away, even when you're physically close. And they can sense betrayal before the lie ever leaves your lips. This is not imagination. This is instinct. And that instinct often makes people uncomfortable. Because when you're around a Scorpio, you can't hide from yourself. And most people aren't ready for that kind of honesty. So they call it paranoia. They call it too intense. They say you're reading too much into things. Until later, when the Scorpio's instincts prove to be right, and the truth comes out just like they said it would. Real life story. Leon, a Scorpio man from Atlanta, had a partner who insisted everything was fine. But he knew something had shifted. She was colder, quieter, smiling more but with eyes that had disconnected. He asked her directly. She denied it. Instead of accusing her, he stepped back, watched, waited. 2 months later, she confessed she had been emotionally involved with someone else for weeks before she ever admitted it. He didn't yell, he just nodded and said, "I already knew." The regret. What people regret most after leaving a Scorpio isn't just losing the relationship, it's losing the one person who saw them clearly, who noticed the lies they were telling, even to themselves. And once a Scorpio stops asking for the truth, it's not because they no longer care, it's because they've already accepted it. Life lesson from reason 9. If you find someone who can sense your truth without you having to explain, don't run from it. Because while most people fall for your mask, a Scorpio falls for your essence. And if they ever go silent, that's not confusion, that's closure. Reason 10. You'll miss the presence long after the person is gone. Some people walk away from your life and it feels like a door quietly closing. But when a Scorpio leaves, something shifts in the air. It's not just their body that exits, it's their energy, the emotional weight they carried for you, the silent protection, the spiritual gravity that made you feel anchored even when life was chaotic. And when that's gone, you don't just miss a person, you miss the field of presence that surrounded them, a presence that made you feel seen, grounded, safe. But you don't notice it right away. At first there's relief. The silence feels peaceful. You convince yourself the intensity was too much. But then the world starts to feel dull, disconnected, surface level. And that's when the realization comes in like a slow storm. I didn't just lose a relationship. I lost a frequency I didn't even know I needed until it was no longer there. Real life story. Jordan, a man from Colorado, once said about his Scorpio ex, "She never talked much, but when she was in the room, it felt like everything slowed down, like I could breathe deeper, like my mind stopped racing." After their breakup, he entered a relationship with someone more easygoing. He thought it would be better, simpler, but he found himself anxious again, distracted, unseen. And it wasn't about the person. It was the presence he missed. The regret. People regret leaving Scorpios because they underestimate how much emotional presence matters. They think love is about doing until they realize that with a Scorpio, it was always about being. And once you've felt that kind of stillness, that kind of soul-deep awareness, everything else feels like noise. Life lesson from reason 10. In a world addicted to distractions, people who bring you back to yourself are sacred. Don't overlook the ones whose energy calms your nervous system, whose silence speaks louder than anyone else's affection. Because you may not always remember what they said, but you will never forget how they made you feel. Reason 11. Karma doesn't miss a Scorpio, it moves through them. When you hurt a Scorpio, you don't just walk away from a person. You walk into a spiritual contract. Not because they curse you, not because they seek revenge, but because the energy you put into that connection, whether sacred or toxic, echoes. Scorpios are ruled by Pluto, the planet of death, rebirth, and karma. So when someone betrays them, leaves them, or plays games with their heart, the universe takes note, and it responds. Not always with punishment, sometimes with lessons, sometimes with reflection, sometimes with a mirror so sharp you finally see what you did when it's already too late. That's why so many people who leave Scorpios say things like, "I kept dreaming about them. Everything in my life felt off after they left. I didn't feel free, I felt haunted." Because their presence doesn't just live in your memory, it lives in your energetic field. Real life story. Sasha, a Scorpio woman from Miami, was cheated on by her long-term boyfriend. She found out, didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't argue. She simply said, "I release you." But the universe doesn't forget. Months later, he lost a major business deal. Friends drifted. Nothing worked out for him. He admitted, "It was like something in my life flipped upside down, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd messed with something sacred." He had the regret. People regret leaving Scorpios because they don't realize what they were connected to until they're cut off. It's not superstition, it's resonance. And when you remove yourself from someone who was divinely aligned with your soul's growth, the loss vibrates far deeper than emotion. It touches destiny. Life lesson from reason 11. Don't play with energies that come from the underworld and the stars at the same time. Scorpios don't need to get even. The universe does that on their behalf. So if you leave with honesty, with integrity, with awareness. Because when you wrong a Scorpio, you're not just walking away from a person, you're walking into a spiritual reckoning. Reason 12. A Scorpio cannot be replaced, only remembered. You'll try. After they're gone, you'll search for the same depth in someone else. You'll chase the same silence that made you feel safe, the same eyes that pierced through your lies and held your truth. But no matter how far you go, how many people you touch, how many hearts you break trying to find the one you lost, you'll never quite find another Scorpio, because what you had wasn't casual, it wasn't convenient, it wasn't just love, it was alchemical. Scorpios don't love with their ego, they love with their essence. They merge, they absorb, they create a spiritual blueprint that lives in your bones long after they leave your bed. And the most painful realization of all, you had it, you couldn't handle it, and now you can't forget it. Real life reflection. Tina, a Scorpio man's ex from Portland, summed it up perfectly. She said he was the first person who saw everything about me, the rage, the fear, the hope, and didn't look away. I left because I thought I needed peace, but now I realize what I called chaos was actually transformation, and I haven't felt alive since. The regret. Most people don't regret leaving a Scorpio because they stopped loving them. They regret it because they realized too late that the love they ran from was the most honest thing that ever happened to them. Final life lesson. Scorpio doesn't just love you, they awaken you. And once your soul has been touched by that kind of fire, nothing lukewarm will ever satisfy again. So if you've lost a Scorpio, honor what you had. And if you're with one now, don't take it for granted. Because not everyone will hold your pain without judgment. Not everyone will protect you without praise. Not everyone will see your soul and still choose to stay. But a Scorpio will, until they can't. And when they're gone, The silence they leave behind will echo longer than the words you never said. If this message stirred something in you, a memory, a truth, a person you've never truly let go of, you're not alone. Scorpios don't come into our lives by accident. They arrive as teachers, healers, catalysts. So if you've ever loved a Scorpio or lost one, drop a comment below and share your story. You never know who else is silently carrying the same regret or the same love. And if you're on a journey of emotional healing, spiritual growth, or simply trying to understand the unseen forces that shape our relationships, subscribe to the Path to Buddha Wisdom. This is more than a channel. It's a sanctuary for souls who feel deeply and aren't afraid to transform. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next revelation.